Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I have a special guest with us tonight. He's an author. He goes by the name of Peter Moon. Peter, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, and thank you again so much for coming. I really appreciate it. We've had a few guests come on and talk about Montauk, and I'm like, I can't think of a better author to get on here that knows more about Montauk than yourself. And you've actually got to work with some of who I consider like the original people involved in Montauk, like Preston Nichols and also Stuart Swordlow. I always have a little bit of trouble pronouncing his last name. But I wanted to ask, did you ever get a chance to talk to Al Bielek at all in your work?
Oh, very much so.
Oh, okay.
Very much. Al Bielek was made a very valuable contribution. What had happened is when I started to write the book with Preston, of course, I was taking Preston's diatribe, but Al Bielek had come to town and he wanted to go to Princeton to research, go to the Institute for Advanced Study and try and research the history of the Philadelphia experiment and his involvement. So it was arranged for me to take Al to Princeton. I sat next to him when I first heard the lecture on the Montauk Project, but I never talked to him. And now Preston told him to tell me everything he could about Montauk because I was writing the book. And Al set some very interesting realizations in motion on that trip when he told me about the Anderson family. He told me that the Anderson family were the custodians of time. And he said that it was a man named George Anderson who allowed Preston to get onto Camp Hero and to acquire the equipment that was authorized to him by the government surplus agency. And Anderson went out of his way to help Preston do this, according to Al and according to Preston. Now, he is mentioned in the book, George Anderson. Now, he told me that the Anderson twins had overseen his placement into technical school for his career. They put him on his course, and they were twins. They were blue-eyed and blonde-haired, and they were, as they say, they worked at Airborne Instruments Laboratory, which was where Preston worked at one time. They were very mysterious, and they had known him when he grew up in Nutley, New Jersey. So he said, and he said they went to New Hampshire and went to a spaceport in New Hampshire and went off to Alpha Centauri. This was the story. It was a weird story, a wild story. But he told me about the Anderson family. And that stayed with me because we can talk all we want about the Montauk Project today, and I'm happy to indulge you. But the Montauk Project, which did indeed occur, was an effort to usurp the powers of divinity and to basically change time itself and control time. It was crashed through its own malfeasance. And what appeared in my life years later was a man named Dr. David Anderson, and I never forgot the name. And he had a time travel research center on Long Island. And
wow.
This is something that
because I don't hear much about the Andersons when I look into anything about Montauk. Like the groundbreaking.
Anything about Al Bielek that's been promoted doesn't include this. They disinclude me, and they take the story and they run it into the ground in terms of being, progressive. It's like taking a star quarterback like Tom Brady and do nothing but running plays, and that's all you do, and you don't really go anywhere.
Good analogy. That's a good analogy.
You don't really go anywhere, or you don't use his skills. Now, so this is the progress that I have made.
So where does that fall in? Where does that fall in like the timeline when people think about Montauk? Like, there's when I think about, just because I think of Al Bielek as almost being the staple in the timeline when it comes to Montauk that I know the most about, with also his previous lives that he lived, and his experience on the Philadelphia during the Philadelphia experiment on the USS Eldridge,
Right.
when they hopped off during the process. Like
Right.
that to me was like the beginning steps of Montauk, like publicly. I don't know much more about that. When you said the Andersons, I was really intrigued. I was like, what? How do they fall into that, and where do they help the process?
Well, they are mysterious, but Al Bielek recognized. He was told by a man named what was his name? I think his name was Bacon, or no, God, I forget the guy's name. I talked to him. He had once told Al that he was Edward Cameron, and I think his name was Alan Beacon. Alan Beacon. He lived in the city. He was a practitioner of sorts. I think a sort of a health guru or metaphysical type person, and he said he told Al what his identity had been, and Al was a person who was always grasping at ephemeral straws. Preston never believed his story that he was regressed. He didn't believe it because he could find no other corroborating technology. He said it didn't mean it didn't happen, but he was always suspicious because Al was somebody who suffered mind control and was grasping at straws trying to put his story back together.
Well, didn't him Al showing up at the Montauk base at a future point, did that ever come to fruition on timeline scales? Like he had jumped off the Eldridge, and then at one point I remember he was in a future spot near Montauk.
Well, he jumped off to Montauk, according to his story. Him and Duncan were on the Eldridge, and they jumped overboard to protect themselves from the experiment that was happening, to escape it. And
I didn't know if that was before the far future situation as well, when he talked about the floating cities. And
story. That's a different story. That's not from the Eldridge, from any story that I've heard.
Oh, okay. Well, the one I think I'm referencing is Al Bielek had this a 9-hour interview that he did where he's just kind of sitting. I think he's in a library somewhere, and he's got a bunch of books behind him, and he just sits down for 9 hours and tries to tell his timeline from beginning to end. And that's kind of what I'm referencing in my head. I don't have it on my hands at night.
I one time watched him give about a 3-hour lecture, or maybe not quite that long, once. And it was very convoluted and hard to follow. And after 3 hours, it kind of made sense. But then again, what could I do with it? It was tedious. It was onerous. It kind of made sense. But then it's kind of like, it's like you've watched a 3-hour movie and you don't remember it very well. It's I could never, the problem with Al is he was disconnected and not integrated with life in the physical plane. The same could be said for Preston. Preston thought Al was a very good psychic. He spent a lot of time researching, a lot of time investigating, talking to people, but he was very loose with his facts and loose with his verifications, and he invited himself to be discredited. It's not that he wasn't involved at all, but all of these people involved suffered malfunctions of the mind. This is what the whole Montauk Project was about. It was about the fact that when people went out of this dimension, as experienced in the Philadelphia experiment, they sort of lost their marbles. They lost their marbles. They lost their orientations to their mind and to the physical plane. The mind is the interface, between the spirit and the physical plane, and it distorted perceptions. It distorted your perception of time, and therefore, people who think they are time traveling might be, but they're certainly time traveling in their mind, and it might be that their mind is not processing reality, much as if you were on a hallucinogenic, and you could think you're in all sorts of places when you're on the hallucinogenic, because your visual cortex is gating in all sorts of weird stuff that doesn't fit with this so-called reality. So the people in the Montauk Project who were experimented on fall into this category. They're suffering.
I was just going to reference the Montauk Chronicles, the movie. I know you probably know of it. The one where they depict the program children in Montauk, and heavy emphasis on fracturing the mind, and like this mental game that was going on as well.
I can't speak for that production. I wouldn't recommend anybody watch it.
Is it not? Is it not? Do you think it's? I was just saying. I was kind of wondering if you thought it was similar.
It's disingenuous.
Okay.
The person who put it together is extremely dishonest, and
gotcha. You don't have to expand. I get it.
Yeah, it's like it's not worth my comment on. But yeah, they were indeed, fracturing the minds of people. But it's like, to talk about how they're fracturing the minds of people is ghoulish. It's ghoulish. And yes, they did horrible things to people, and this was part of the mind control. They did indeed.
Well, I think that's publicly all people hear about is the ghoulish side when it comes to what happened.
Yes, and this is why that production does not feed the truth or the higher octave of the truth. It's so. In other words, what life is about in an intelligent reference frame is transmuting energy, transmuting from the lower to the higher. The alchemy is to the Philosopher's Stone is a metaphor and perhaps an actuality for transmuting base metals into gold, which is again, although that is potentially an actual according to alchemical text, it's also a metaphor for the human experience, is to turn the lower base experiences into higher experiences. So this is, with the Montauk Project, there is a lot of gold within the story and the investigation that I did. Unfortunately, the preponderance of people interested either ignore that gold or try to transmute it into lead. And Preston Nichols was no exception to the rule, because although he was a brilliant scientist and we owe him a great deal of gratitude, he couldn't get out of the Montauk paradigm. He couldn't get out of his own programming, and he wouldn't. He just couldn't do it. A case in point is shortly before he passed away, about a year before he passed away, I had noticed I was redoing the Montauk Project book. I've done the Silver Anniversary Edition, which is the 25th year after the Montauk Project, and I delineate all of the investigation that I'm talking about now, or alluding to, that's been done since the original book, the investigation that ensued, which has, of course, been gleefully ignored by those who have sought to do documentaries on the subject. Sometimes, willfully ignored, so as to produce a denigrated subject and to discredit Preston. But I asked him, I said, it says in the book here that you were under a non-disclosure agreement to reveal what you read about the Philadelphia experiment. 30-year non-disclosure. I said, that 30 years is expired now. He goes, it was 50 years, which was not true. He said that because he didn't want to talk about it. And why didn't he want to talk about it? Because he was afraid. That's how afraid Preston was of the consequences. I can tell some backstory of that. He worked, and of course I said, we're going to mention that you worked at Airborne Instruments Laboratory, AIL. In the book, it says BJM. And BJM was just made up letters I made up because they were the letters to the right of AIL in the alphabet.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so I had one guy come up to me once and says, I worked at BJM. Those are my initials. I said, no, those aren't initials. Those are just initials I made up. And he thought that he worked at the company. It was like he was, people grasp at this stuff and project. But it was AIL, which is Airborne Instruments Laboratory. They made the equipment that was at Camp Hero, along with Sperry Electronics. Their names were plastered all over the radar transmitter building. And Preston worked at Airborne Instruments Laboratory. He said, oh, we better not mention that. I said, Preston, nobody cares anymore. Nobody cares anymore. Sure, they cared in the beginning, but it's like he
Yeah, I think. Oh, and I think there was definitely quite a smear campaign done on Preston and his credibility and sanity for a long time, and I could tell for the longest time there. I just thought there was a social awkwardness to Preston, just from an outsider's perspective. Like, some people that are just so intelligent are operating on a really high level, and they do have a disconnect when it comes to talking to people or being in front of a camera, and I don't know what it was, but I was getting that read off of Preston for some reason.
Oh, totally. He was very socially awkward. He wasn't always, but he did. And I was told from the beginning by people that knew him before I did that he was designed to, shoot foot bullets in his story. In other words, that was part of the program, is that he would make himself so disingenuous that people would reject him. And, I would tell him, don't talk about the aliens and the Drano. Don't talk about the aliens and the Lysol. He'd say the Greys would spray themselves. They'd have to spray the Greys with Lysol, and that the reptilian would drink Drano. I mean, these do not behoove you. They don't suit your credibility. He says, well, it's what I remember. Yeah, it's what you remember. But do you understand that people aren't going to relate to that? And it's going to take credibility away from your story. Well, if they do, that's okay. So in other words, he didn't care.
And you think that was part of the programming that he had gone through, where it was there for disinformation to make it, if he did come out, at least he would poke holes in his own story.
Well, yeah, and there were some. Preston could be astoundingly accurate and good with certain things, astounding. But then there was always this element of him that was prone to discredit himself. But as Duncan once said about him, he'd say something and you'd think he was off his rocker, but over time he would show himself to be right. So, but back to what I was saying about the Philadelphia experiment. He said, it's 50 years now. He studied the Philadelphia experiment when he was working for Airborne Instruments Laboratory. He studied it in detail, and that's because he was involved with this stealth technology. And the stealth technology was confidential, could not be talked about, and he had a legitimate reason for not talking about that. And he did sign an agreement not to talk about the Philadelphia experiment, but he didn't want to have, any. He could have clued us in on a lot more about the Philadelphia experiment. However, as we move forward in time, the Philadelphia experiment and what actually happened is much less important than it would have been if Dr. David Anderson had not arrived on the scene, because his technology supersedes anything and everything they did at Philadelphia Montauk. And that's the big story. That is the big story that is, to this day, largely ignored. Not completely ignored, but for example, when I was on some documentary,
I saw one of your recent ones that you just did not too long ago, or at least it just got released not too long ago.
It wasn't very recent, but
one of our guests, Terry Hopper, is actually the one who shared it with me not too long ago. It was the last one I saw video footage of you doing a documentary.
Well, this one was by the WB network. Okay. Mysteries Decoded, it was called. And I agreed to participate. And I was in Romania. And I got very sick. Only the second time I've been sick in Romania after about 11 or 12 trips. I got very sick. And I had this dream that I was being attacked by a martial artist with blades. And it was not a very nice dream. I managed to overcome them all. But I now said, boy, what's going on here? I got up in the middle of the night, went to this tent where they were, to get my bearings, where people were still up. They stay up a lot of the night. And I was able to get through to my friend in Hollywood that had optioned the screen rights to Montauk, and he told me we were being we were being ambushed. The guy who put the show together refused to talk to him, said he was off the show, and basically the show was going crooked. And so the show finally, when the show did appear, it was very dishonorable what they had done. I revealed the time reactor, patent for the time reactor, which is a time machine by David Anderson. I gave the patent to the guy. So what they did, and they refused to put any mention of David Anderson. I showed a time reactor patent. They did not mention David Anderson. They just showed the time reactor patent. And then they showed Michio Kaku, the
astrophysicist.
Well, as my co-author Douglas Dietrich refers to him as the house nigger. He's the house nigger because he will do anything that the media tells him to do.
All right. I have to be a little careful on YouTube. That's kind of a offensive term on YouTube. So this was credited to somebody that you were quoting, though?
Oh, yeah. And
okay. I'm not a big fan of that word,
by a fellow Japanese who referred to him as that because he is
that gives a lot more context.
Well, yeah. But anyway, Michio Kaku, he said that the patent shows no. He says it looks like the scrawlings of a child, and there's no power source. You have to have power to do time travel. Well, this is the disingenuous because the patent explains the power source. There is a tremendous power source which enables it to operate. And this is the disingenuousness of the documentary. And it showed that I was indeed being attacked. And they were using Michio Kaku to attack me. Not attack me physically, but through the poison tongue. And they didn't mention David Anderson. I'm showing his patent and he's saying this is the scrawlings of a child. So it's not the scrawlings of a child. It is scientifically understandable and but here is the supposed.
So they just brought him in as a name to discredit, though. That was basically
this was an effort to discredit me, to discredit Dr. David Anderson by not mentioning him, and to basically shit can the entire story. And this is the problem that has happened with the Montauk Project, it's like, okay, let's leave it at a um, despicable level, and let's not listen to it. Let's not go beyond.
Mhm.
Let's not go beyond.
Yeah, they want to diminish it and say, don't look over here.
Well, yeah. So what are they? What is their purpose? Their purpose is to obfuscate and discredit, and that's exactly what they did in the documentary. And apparently, they fired the producer who was putting it together and worked very hard at it. And then he refused to talk to us. And it was really a pity because he was being lined up to do some other work that he, kind of discredited himself because he wouldn't talk. Like, why wouldn't he talk? Was he part of the plan? I don't know. So that was unfortunate. But this is the type of thing that gets done. And so, it was just dishonorable and discreditable. And that's what I expect from people who try to approach this subject. Let's ignore what's important. And so it's interesting that you have such a strong interest in this, but you've never heard of Dr. David Anderson.
And I think it's interesting that none of those stories I've never heard it on Preston's interviews. I've been following Duncan Cameron for a while as well, but at the same time, he kind of did this. I was going to ask you about this. He almost did this like leave of absence from talking about these subjects in his later years, and he seemed to go down a really different path before his passing. And I was always interested in what drove him to that and what got him to kind of pull away from the Montauk crowd, but he was still doing interviews and stuff like that, and it just seems like he didn't touch on those topics as much.
Well, Duncan had a lot of problems, and he had he was severely mind controlled and never could get out of it, never could get past it, and he frustrated the people who tried to work with him. I had offered to write a book with him. We talked about it. And eventually he got very weird about it. And then he finally said, didn't want to do it, which was a great relief to me because, it
was interesting because he almost disappeared off the internet for a while. Like it was hard to find stuff about Duncan Cameron for a long period of time.
Well, he really did have experiences, and he really was a part of things. He was the main sort of psychic horse that drove the whole thing. But, and he basically refused to take responsibility for his involvement in it. And that's what it really came down to. He couldn't be responsible for it.
Do you think it had anything to do with without jumping afar and confusing the audience that might be paying attention, do you think it had anything to do with the conjuring of Junior and all of the things that happened with that? Do you think
no. He just couldn't take responsibility. Okay. And I actually saw it in person. Preston was working with him, and he just refused to take responsibility. And when somebody refuses, that's their choice. And he never got better. He progressively got worse and, got prostate cancer, something I could have helped him with, but he didn't want the help, So, he was stubborn and unfortunately passed away. He made a great contribution. They all made a great contribution. And there was a great magic when the three of them would get together, meaning Al Bielek, Preston Nichols, and Duncan Cameron. It was a great magic that would sort of
watching that old VHS tape gets me every time. Yeah. When they're sitting down in that room, and it's the four of them, and the guy interviewing, and then also the three main guys that we're talking about.
Yeah, well, yes, and that was and then if you saw them together live, I mean, in present, after that, they were they were magnetic, they were magic, and it was almost like a hologram of the whole thing was being created. They were a witness to something remarkable. Unfortunately, they delivered this incredible story, but they couldn't get past it. And this is where, this is something I was able to do because I was investigating and trying to verify it. And I began to experience incredible concentrations of synchronicity in trying to substantiate it. I didn't, and so in the book, the Silver Anniversary edition of the Montauk Project, there were two investigations. One was the linear or journalistic investigation, which Preston and I conducted. I did not realize until writing the book how much he contributed to the journalistic investigation, not in terms of writing, but in terms of all the field trips we did to Montauk together. And then I did an occult investigation, which was basically my investigation which concerned synchronicity and weird coincidences that happened in and around the Montauk Project or the players involved in the Montauk Project, which eventually led to the discovery that there were ancient pyramids at Montauk, and that the family who were the custodians of those pyramids were the pharaohs, the pharaoh family of the Montauk Indians, or the Montauk tribe, the Montaukets, they're sometimes called. So that was, and they claimed descendancy from Egypt. So this was there was so many doors that opened, and it's quite exciting. But so much of that early stuff occurred many, many years ago, and unfortunately, Preston and Duncan would be mired in their stuff from Montauk. They could never fully transcend it.
I wanted to answer a couple of questions that were popping up in the chat, if you'd like, Peter. Here's one that popped up. I haven't heard of this Air Force Base, but he said, Peter, what's up with Gabrisky Air Force Base?
Gabrisky Air Force Base is in West Hampton on Long Island, which is, if you're going before you get to the East End and the Hamptons, it's kind of like this Air Force Base. And Preston used to be taken there, or so he said. He would be taken to Gabrisky and, be promoted to colonel. He'd come in and say he's now a colonel. Of course, this is not something you're going to find in the Defense Department records. But they'd be asking him to participate in this, that, or the other thing. It was a military base, Air Force base, that he would be taken to. And I've heard of other people being taken there. Of course, Montauk Air Force Station is basically a New York State park, at least ostensibly. And so sort of the last military base you have is Gabrisky. And that's what it is. I mean, Preston could probably talk all sorts about its secret capacity, capabilities, and whatnot, but it's not something I ever looked into. I've heard here and there somebody would have weird experiences connected to Gabrisky, but that's about all I can really say about it, because that's about all I really know about it.
And then one of our favorite viewers dropped this little bit. He said David Lewis Anderson, astrophysicist, was interviewed by Art Bell January 31st on 2010.
That's correct.
Yeah, no, he's quick with the facts. Terry is on point. So he's backing up what you were saying about the Anderson family and David Anderson specifically.
Well, yes, and he announced on that show that he was now could put human beings and send them back in time. And, and that was not something he could do when I met him in 1999. So David has basically perfected the ability to slow time down and speed it up. And at the Time Travel Education Center, I have explained his work very clearly. It takes some concentration to get through it, but it's 8th grade math and physics that explain that time travel does not violate the laws of math and physics. It's very simple, but he had a hard time explaining it to people. He had a hard time. I listened when I was taken to, he brought me to Romania in 2008. And in 2009, he lectured in Romania on time technology, which included a personal tutoring session with me, which was, it was very interesting because I grasped and understood what he said, but then an hour later, I kind of forget it. When I was in his presence, I understood it. But when I got home, I wrestled with it. I got some books and I was able to understand it. And it was years later that I was able to break it down into even better language, which he very much appreciated. He was stunned that I could explain it so simply. And then I took that and made it even more simple and put it into video format and created the Time Travel Education Center, which I encourage people. There's 7 free videos that will explain the math and physics of time travel.
And we got the ticker running on the bottom of the website for the Time Travel Education Center. If anybody sees it, feel free to check it out and see what Peter's talking about. Because when did you establish this? You established this quite a while ago, right?
2015 is when I did that work, and I think the website went up in 2015. I was working on it, and it might have started in 2016. And it's not been recognized or appreciated to the extent it would, or could. If Michio Kaku had read and understood that and was honest, he would have had a deeper appreciation. I've been told that he's jealous, not at me, but of Dr. David Anderson, because he doesn't know what he's talking about. And yet he's.
I feel like Michio Kaku's going through his own battle with giving up on string theory. He likes to beat a dead horse, no matter what it's about.
Well, it's like I learned in this process. I didn't know this, and I learned from one of the guys who used to come to the meetings, and he became my friend. He said he was an engineer, and he says engineers hate physicists. They hate them because they don't do anything. They just theorize. Now, there are some physicists who do, and physicists don't like engineers. Well, David Anderson is both a physicist and an engineer. So he bridged the gap.
And that's what they didn't want. That's what they didn't want people to see. That's why the Andersons aren't known.
Well, I don't know what they want or don't want, but certainly it seems that you're right, that they don't want it. And so anyway, he has been a very pivotal character in my life because he paved the way to reach beyond and beyond. And of course, when he read the Montauk Project, he said it woke him up to the fact that he was a spiritual being. And he contacted me and wanted to work with me, but he's very elusive. And although I might have spoken to him a couple of years ago, and I will occasionally get a message from him, he's very much wants to keep out of the public eye. There have been times when he's gone to the public eye and it always kind of backfires because the people aren't ready for him. He says that world leaders or people in positions of power can get very out of control when they learn about what he has and what he's capable of, because it's something they don't understand and can't control. So they go ballistic rather than to approach it with an understanding. It's a reaction.
And do you think, like for these people involved in these projects, we were talking about this a little bit offline. Do you think some of the people involved in these projects, just like with Preston, have these, gun in the shoe ideas of poking their poking their holes in their own stories that is programmed into them? Is it part of the programming that's like a regular thing?
Do we want to talk about people's experiences like this? A lot of people that get up and talk on shows should just shut up. They should go talk to a therapist. And so their public expositions become like therapy sessions. And some people want to listen to it. Some people want to listen to it because it corroborates their own stories. So there might be a value to it in that respect. But basically, for the most part, it doesn't go anywhere.
Because it's so hard. Well, I mean, because like my interest in it and hearing the participants in these projects has to do with just my own interest in the project. And I feel like getting a little bit of insight on, what these people might have gone through. Because like I said, the public perception is it's all negative and nothing positive came from it. And everybody wanted to put that, smear campaign all over it. And it's like, oh, well, I really am interested in what these people are going through mentally, even if it doesn't explain well in an interview. And maybe it'll help me understand them a little bit more or what they're going through. I don't know.
But it's not unlike understanding people that were tortured in MK Ultra.
Yeah.
What do you need to understand about it? Do you need to understand the way they were tortured, to what degree they were tortured, how they were tortured, what they went through?
No. Yeah, no.
It's traumatic. I mean, what do you want to find out about them? Now, it's also possible that in some cases they were excited paranormal abilities, and because of their torturing forced them out of their body, and they were able to operate in a psychic sense, for lack of a better word. So some people would experience what would be called extra paranormal abilities. And well, these are interesting and they intrigue people. But one of the problems is these often are prone to suffer from dysfunctional uses and people lose the abilities. So there is an interest in it. And any of these people can be quite psychic, but inevitably it gets misused. So it kind of
well, sticking with the comparison with MK Ultra, I always like to point out the author. I want to make sure I get his name right. Thomas O'Neill. I don't know if you've heard of him. He wrote a different version of the known public story about Charles Manson's life, and he might have had some involvement with Jack Pruitt and MK Ultra, and he points out the significant times like where he was protected by the government and wasn't put in jail for certain crimes. And I thought it was interesting because he was able to interview these people, and all of a sudden, like, getting that deeper side sometimes will give you a different perception of what was portrayed to the public and what the truth was. And sometimes digging a little deeper can unravel these things. But just like you were saying, sometimes you can dig a little deeper and just find things you didn't want to hear about. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Well, yeah, it's all a question of where does one put their attention, and where your mind goes, your energy goes. And do you want to be putting your mind on people that were victimized? It's like I've once saw a book on what the people went through in the Colosseum and all the different horrible things that occurred in the Colosseum of Rome. It's like, why would anybody want to read that stuff? I guess it was historical, but it's grueling. And it's like, people put their attention there. Montauk was a elaborate, sophisticated, and at the same time very crude mind control operation, and it created trauma. So people,
but it's interesting that the public only gets to see the crude and the trauma. And it makes me wonder, like, how much, because with your research, it makes me wonder, like, how many things did the public not know about, like significant things like the Anderson, like David Anderson and the other people involved that were very significant that weren't really talked about, like, and some of the benefits that came from the project that people aren't thinking about. They only think about the negative side effects, the fracturing of the mind, and the horrible sides of it.
Well, I know when I read a book when I was younger, read science fiction, I'd read the book and then I'd look for other books by the author if I liked the book, and I would read more by the author until I didn't like it anymore or whatever. So, it's all a matter of people, what their interest is. It's their interest. And I have taken this entire subject to a different and higher level, and people are free to explore it and understand it. And where is it going to go, instead of keeping one's nose in the gutter. It's not that the Montauk Project should not be studied. It's not that it shouldn't be explored, but it's at the same time, you have to move beyond, and that's what I did. I mean, it was interesting, fascinating. Once I read it and did the book, I kept going. And Preston, he wanted to pull in more intrigue and more conspiracy that would go down a black hole, that would not serve him, would not sell as a book. And even when he did have something to say, he was very short. He was not loquacious in terms. He could talk for hours in a lecture, but when it came down to the brass tacks of offering more information, he was short shrift.
Let me catch up the chat with the viewers here a little bit. Terry was asking, he goes, on the subject of synchronicity, do you have anything related to people seeing 1111, 222, 333, etc., that kind of phenomenon?
Well, I know that when I started experiencing synchronicity, I did see a lot of 1111 clocks. I remember that. And there was a whole synchronicity. I've had it with twos, and synchronicity is the connective glue of it's an extension of the God mind. It is more connected. It's just like all of the fluids and nerve signals in your body are all connected, and they all, if your toe hurts, the brain finds out. That's the universe is the same way. The universe is all connected, and there are some aspects of it that are very close to what you would call the God mind. And so when you see these synchronicities, you're seeing, it's like an aha moment. It's an awareness. It's an awareness of association, relativity. And so when you see the ones and the twos, well, yes, it's something out of the ordinary. I wrote a lot about synchronicity in my book, Synchronicity in the Seventh Seal. Synchronicity in the Seventh Seal, which is now a print-on-demand book. You can get it off of the website, skybooksusa.com. You can get it off of Amazon as well. It's a 400 plus pages, almost 500 pages, which is an exploration of synchronicity and discusses some of the deeper synchronicities that I have had. It rather focuses on spiritual aspects as well.
I also wanted to, because you, in one of the, I want to say it's the second or the third book, you touch on conjuring a little bit when it comes to like Aleister Crowley and man, I wish I had the book right here next to me where I could pull it up.
Montauk Revisited Adventures in Synchronicity, I think you're alluding to.
Okay. And well, because when I was thinking about him and when he was hanging out with like L. Ron Hubbard and stuff like that, that was when he was trying to do those conjuring type rituals Just from my little bit of experience of knowing a little bit about Aleister Crowley's history, when he like held up in a house that he had rented for a long time, and he was working on these conjuring spells. I didn't know if you dabbled into those in the story or what you were touching on.
No. Crowley was not hanging out with L. Ron Hubbard per se. To the best of my knowledge, he was a handler of L. Ron Hubbard. He was Hubbard was an agent of Crowley's under the auspices of British intelligence. This is explained in my book, L. Ron Hubbard, The Tao of Insanity. And that was information was offered to me by Douglas Dietrich, my new co-author. Aleister Crowley, L. Ron Hubbard's involvement with Crowley's magic, at least as it's been chronicled in history, is with Jack Parsons, who was a active disciple and financial supporter of Aleister Crowley. And Hubbard, by his own admission, came to work with Jack Parsons on behalf of naval intelligence. History tells us that he was sent in there by Robert Heinlein, who was very highly placed in the Navy and with the rocket program. Robert Heinlein, who was a scientist who worked at the Philadelphia Naval Yard during the time of the Philadelphia experiment. I don't know. He worked with pressurized suits. I don't know if he had any involvement or knowledge of the Philadelphia experiment. Robert Heinlein, science fiction author, and Hubbard was privy to certain things that took place in Philadelphia. I don't know if he was aware of the Philadelphia experiment. And but anyway, he was, Heinlein was a big fan of magic. Hubbard was a fan of magic. They were writers, and Parsons was a chemist who was also a magician. So what I had discovered when I first met Preston Nichols, that he told me that him and Duncan had been the Wilson brothers in a previous life. And the Wilson brothers were experimenting with time travel or trying to find out about time travel. So I began an investigation, and I tried to verify if there were any Wilson brothers in any of Aleister Crowley's books. And I found out that one of his best friends was named Duncan Cameron, and that his real name was Edward Alexander Crowley, not Aleister Crowley, and that Edward and Alexander were the name of the Cameron brothers involved in the Philadelphia experiment, Edward and Alexander. This started a series of coincidences that was too coincidental to be just a coincidence. So I began to pursue these, and this became the subject of the book Montauk Revisited, Adventures in Synchronicities. All of these synchronicities led me to the revelation that L. Ron Hubbard's magical partner, Jack Parsons, had a wife named Cameron. And I read this in an article, and it said her name is Cameron. Well, here I have Cameron. I'm looking, why the hell is she named Cameron? So I then found a book that had just been published. It was called Freedom is a Two-Edged Sword, The Essays of John Whiteside Parsons, Jack Parsons, edited by his wife, Marjorie Cameron. I found out she had a first name, Marjorie Cameron, and Hymenius Beta. Hymenius Beta was the titular name of the head of Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. And Aleister Crowley had given successorship of his organization to Carl Germer, who seemingly had given it to a man named Carlos Mata from Brazil. And Mata had a big fight, a court legal battle over the successorship, and it fell to a man named Grady McMurtry, who basically died of a heart attack on the day he won the court case. But that successorship went to this guy who was known as Hymenius Beta. So I didn't have Marjorie Cameron's address, but I had Hymenius Beta, whose P.O. box was 7666, New York, New York. And I wrote him a letter saying that I wanted to meet Marjorie Cameron. I told him who I was, about my research. And then after putting the letter in the mailbox, I flew to Southern California, where I attended a book fair, the American Booksellers Association in Anaheim Convention Center. And I walked into the convention center and I met this guy. His name was Christopher Hyatt. He's now deceased. He was very well-known in magical circles. And I saw him in this booth with all sorts of books on Aleister Crowley and magic. And I asked him if he knew Marjorie Cameron, if I were to find her. And he says, go contact Bill, Mystic Fire Video. He knows her. So I went over there and staked out Bill and gave him the book, gave him a copy of the Montauk Project, told him who I was and what I wanted. And after talking to him, it became obvious that he was Hymenius Beta. And he admitted such. He says, please don't tell my name. It's now on the internet if you want to find it. But
so
yeah,
do you think there was any relation to Mrs. Cameron and the Cameron family that we know in like the Montauk Project?
Well,
Do you think it was an alias?
He paved the way for me to meet Marjorie Cameron. He gave me her phone number. I called her and she agreed to meet with me the following day, which was a Sunday. So I abandoned the book fair for an afternoon, and her phone number ended in 66606. And I asked her about that, and she says, well, that number was given to me. She says, I didn't ask for it. She said it was given to me when they did a whole expose on me in the LA Times. And I started getting so many, they put my phone number in there. They said they give me so many phone calls that I had to change it. And they gave her the number 6606. Now, Marjorie Cameron, I met with her for 4 hours on my first meeting with her. And she told me, she talked. I told her a little bit about who I was and what I was doing. She talked all about the old days at what they called the parsonage, when L. Ron Hubbard hung out with Jack Parsons and Robert Heinlein. And so by the end of it, the story, she told me her story. I told her mine. I told her about the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project, which she'd heard of Philadelphia, but she didn't know about Montauk. And I said, I don't know why I'm here. I said, I've told you these stories about all these synchronicities with Wilsons and Camerons. That's why I'm interested in your name, because it's a Cameron. And she says, well, it's interesting because although my name is Cameron, my real name is a Wilson. She says, I was adopted by my uncle, who was a Cameron, but my real father was a Wilson. And she says, L. Ron Hubbard was a Wilson too. I said, how do you know that? She said, I read it in a book. And it turned out L. Ron Hubbard's father, who I had occasion to see in the flesh when he visited the ship that I was on with L. Ron Hubbard, Harry, what was his name? Harry, HRH, Harry Ross Hubbard.
Okay.
He would have been a commander in the Navy, but he was born into the Wilson family in Iowa and was adopted by the Hubbard family. And so he was from Iowa, and Marjorie Cameron was also from Iowa. So I could see in the genetic features of Marjorie Cameron and L. Ron Hubbard both having red hair and having very prominent features. They look very similar, like they could have been brother and sister or aunt and nephew or something like that. She was, I believe, younger than Hubbard. But in any case, when I told Hymenius Beta, he laughed. He said they both came from the same batch. He laughed. So meeting Marjorie Cameron and her telling me that the Wilsons were and the Camerons were connected was like a major revelation. And of course, I had a background in Scientology, which only intrigued me because here I was finding out more about L. Ron Hubbard and his mysterious.
Well, let me dig in. Let me dig into that a little bit. What's your background with Scientology?
I joined or entered Scientology upon graduating high school in January.
Okay. What? If you don't mind, not too much personal. What state was it? Because I know they're stronger in certain states.
California, Davis, California, 1971. I graduated in January, got involved in their initial communications course, did very well with it, studied the Dianetics course, and did extremely well with it, had major experiences, which they call exteriorization out of the body. It was incredible. I was with people who were having incredible experiences. It was amazing.
Did you receive? Okay, so I'm getting a lot of feels right now. So for the last 6 years, I've been diving into Scientology and been very involved with the California Scientologist community and also the Chicago one that's being established now. And I didn't know this connection to L. Ron Hubbard before you said it, but I told you offline that I'd be really interested in talking about Scientology because that is the one topic that I love to bring up to Scientologists that they definitely deviate from is, what about Aleister Crowley's relationship with Scientology? I mean, you're looking at a religion with Bridge Publications being the publishers, I guess, and they have more context and more writing from L. Ron Hubbard than any writer I've ever seen composed, and they do not want to talk about that topic at all in any way, shape, or form. And I also didn't know Jack Pruitt was involved, and some of the other people.
Parsons, not Jack Pruitt.
Oh, okay, Parsons from the Parsons Project.
No, that's Alan Parsons. That's a different person.
No, not the band. No, not the band. Oh, sorry. No, I thought Jack Parsons had other involvement in different projects as well.
Well, you said Parsons Project.
I immediately thought of the band when you said it. I was like, no.
Involved in a lot of different things, but anyway, yes. Scientology has no. It undermines the associations with magic, undermines its current agenda, and it's only going to send people from their perspective on a goose chase that's not going to accomplish what they want to accomplish. So Scientology, as it was invented, discovered, or put together by L. Ron Hubbard, was a very when he did it, it was a very simple system to relieve one of one's mental hang-ups, mental dysfunctions. And it was taking therapy and putting it in the hands of the common man instead of having to go to a psychiatrist who at that time were very prone to misuse their position. Now, and it was wildly popular. And the only reason it was popular was two reasons it was popular: because it excited people's hopes, number one, and it had a high degree of effectiveness. So,
and also a lot of people don't know that this auditing process and past life regression was what was presented before Scientology. And Scientology was honestly built around this auditing process they eventually took into Scientology, because that was what I was actually more interested in when I found out about Scientology, was this past life regression therapy that you could actually do with one of their certified auditors, and you could learn about past lives. And I thought, okay, that's an interesting topic. And then they ended up turning it into a religion following that. and that was like my core interest in it. And a
Well,
lot of people don't know that it started.
there's a lot of history into what went on there, and but what Scientology was, you didn't do it to learn about past lives. You did it to relieve yourself of mental trauma, in mental sensations, mental pain, emotions, psychosomatic sensations, feelings, attitudes. That's what you did it. Now, in the course of that, it was routine to address past lives. So you would have discovery of phenomena, which was often referred to as past lives. Often it was in the realm of visualization and imagination. And sometimes people made more of the past lives than was actually warranted. However, you were never supposed to talk about this. This was verboten. It was not supposed to be talked about. It was.
Oh yeah, no, they questioned me a lot that's when I told them that was my interest in um, uh, being audited and the chance of being audited. And when I actually did it, what my interest was the basis of what auditing was founded on. Before Scientology was
Let me
founded,
tell you,
that's what
it
we
was
were
not
doing.
founded on past lives. It was not founded on past lives.
No, no, no. That was just something that was one of the things that they found when doing this this
It was a
therapy
side
type
effect.
session.
It was a side effect, and
Yeah,
I would tell you that Scientologists almost uniformly believe in past lives. But the purpose of it was to relieve one's mental dysfunctions. That was Dianetics, to relieve the mental dysfunctions. Um, Scientology got more into the spiritual realm, but and past lives were sort of incidental. It's like if you're working in a circus, you're going to be working with animals sooner or later. You're going to have
but
something to do.
I also feel like that has a lot to do with the person auditing the person that's getting audited. At the same time, it has to do with what they dig into as well in the process. Knowing the auditing process, there's a lot of credit that goes to the auditor and what to dig in on. So it
Well,
might
yeah,
just be
it's
performance.
a team effort for sure. It's a team effort for
Oh yeah.
sure. But so anyway, uh, Dianetics was what Hubbard found is that if people did not address past lives, they would not get better, and that's why it became a staple of of the uh, of the procedures. And um, it definitely has its relative value in the scheme of things. But so anyway, to answer your original question, I had extensive experiences and very positive experiences, and this led me to joining what was called the Sea Organization, which was
The Sea
their.
Orgs. Yeah, no, I know the Sea Orgs.
A lot of people don't know what it is, and the Sea Org or Sea Organization, and that was a highly dedicated bunch of people who were dedicated to L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. And uh, by fate and circumstance, not by my personal desire or initiative, I was brought to his ship, and where I uh, got to see him, got to encounter him, eventually got to meet him, and um, and uh, got, I guess, what you would say, a taste of Scientology from the horse's mouth. And I eventually worked in his personal office, uh, which meant that I handled his personal correspondence and got uh, got to know who he was and what he was about a lot better than most of, certainly far better than the rank and file Scientologist, and also far better than the
But I
rank.
mean, when you think of common Scientology, everybody thinks of Mr. Miscavige as being, that guy. And I don't think he necessarily follows along the same lines as Elron, but I see how he's
No,
a,
definitely not. Definitely not. Um, I had met David when he was a little boy. He lived next door to me. He was always very respectful to me, and but he maneuvered himself into a position of power, and he's become notorious or infamous, and certainly had it's a totally different ball game today, and I don't recommend people get involved with that.
I would say the biggest thing that I took away from because I still so you were saying about the Sea Orgs. The reason I know so much about it is one of my friends that I talked to, a young lady, but I'll just say Mrs. Malm. She is a Sea Org person and a Sea Org participant to this day, and she's the one who reached out to me and told me a little bit about Scientology. The most I learned from it is a common occurrence that I feel like a lot of outsiders have a problem with is the redefining of commonly defined words. If you don't have the foot key on the bottom of most Scientology books, you're not going to understand what they're saying, just for the simple fact that they do redefine some words and what it means to them and their use of it.
This, but I think we're really getting off topic here.
Oh, sorry. I apologize.
You're talking about Scientology, and that's a whole subject in itself. But you had asked me originally what was my involvement. It was at a very, I guess, what you call high administrative level, and I knew all sorts of things that still to this day people that are involved don't know. And one of those was Hubbard's involvement with Jack Parsons. But it never amounted to much, because to get back to another thing you either asked or alluded to, Aleister Crowley's works and Scientology are just not that similar. You will find some similarities in them, but the whole way Scientology, when it was properly done, was administered, was just completely different from anything you would learn in Aleister Crowley's occult books. There are similar principles, of course, but the experience you would have, no way. Just it's like the difference between doing, I suppose, physical training in the army, in boot camp, and going to football practice and learning football plays. It's very different. There are some similarities, but no, it's they both of those things involved, some push-ups and some calisthenics, but no, totally different things. And
no, the only connection I can usually find is there's a few recordings of Ron Hubbard just talking about his interest in Aleister Crowley as a person. Nothing more than that. It's very surface. If you want, let's leave that topic behind, because you covered so many topics.
Let me give you perspective. L. Ron Hubbard was deeply involved in magic and the occult, deeply, and out of that evolved his iterations of Scientology, which were also based upon human psychology and what he'd studied with a Navy psychiatrist. But so it was an outgrowth. But what I would tell people is that Scientology is what you would call the familiar of L. Ron Hubbard. Familiar is a talk in magical language for an extension of magician. Like if a witch has a black cat to do her bidding, or a bat is her familiar. L. Ron Hubbard's familiar, his magic wand, so to speak, was Scientology. And it worked for him. It was his outreach into the world. And so anybody involved in Scientology was working under that quote unquote spell. And that's so that if you don't understand that and recognize it, you can eventually come to a dead end. And even at that, so it's not that his techniques aren't valuable. They're extremely valuable if they're used properly. But it's like people.
I'll tell anybody to this day, as much as I might dislike some of the things about Scientology, it is the best self-help book for people that are actually in need of it. There is a lot there to learn, and there are a lot of tools, and that's how Scientology presented them to me, are tools that we're going to let you know about that you can use in your life to better your life and, help you pass through. And that's how it was always presented to me. It was never presented in a negative way.
Well, it definitely has its merits, but what happens is people get stuck to it, and they get stuck in a game, and so many people have come to unfortunate circumstances because they are basically not applying the principles, or they're being misdirected. But that explains. Now, what's important with my connection to Scientology with regard to the Montauk Project is that L. Ron Hubbard, in his early years, in the early 50s, was publishing material saying that spiritual beings could be controlled by electronics. And this is how spiritual beings were being trapped, and their abilities were being reduced, and they were being implanted further with electronics. And so that's
the thetons, something around that line.
He called a spiritual being a thetan. A thetan.
Thetan. Okay, I'm pronouncing it wrong.
What I'm going to say to you now is, here I went through Scientology, went through it with flying colors from my own perspective, and was very happy with what I did there. But I was done with it. I was done with it in 1983, never to go back to it. And then after 7 years on Long Island, figuring out what to do with my life, I encountered Preston Nichols. And when I did, he talked about the Montauk Project, and I saw this is exactly what L. Ron Hubbard talked about. It's electronics using to control people, and it's an implant station. So this was a vindication in a very weird way of everything I had learned, in L. Ron Hubbard's studio, for lack of a better word. So, and to meet Marjorie Cameron, now I was getting a full circle of
and that's what I was just going to say, like that learning that he was a Williams, and that she was adopted by Cameron. That's groundbreaking.
A Wilson, yes.
Oh, Wilson, sorry.
Williams. So yes, so that was, of course, a great revelation. And then when I would later meet my current co-author, Douglas Dietrich, who worked in the Defense Department library, and one of his duties was to burn the documents and the personnel records of L. Ron Hubbard that he said were falsified. And he said that Hubbard was an agent of Aleister Crowley. And this is what he had learned working at the Defense Department. Now, keep in mind, Douglas Dietrich has no axe to grind for L. Ron Hubbard. He's not trying to verify the story that he worked in naval intelligence. But indeed, this is what he came up with. And that was put into my recent book, L. Ron Hubbard, The Tao of Insanity, which is a book that goes into a lot of the, I suppose, many of the questions you've been asking.
Okay, sorry, I have to leave this topic alone because I could go down for a while with you. I didn't actually know that you were a Scientologist. That's awesome because it gives me more insight just about yourself and your experience with it and your knowledge behind it.
I'm not a Scientologist any longer.
Not any longer. Yeah, just work.
I left in 1983 and have not gone back. And have
just as my personal perspective and knowing what the Sea Orgs are, how do you get out of a contract like that?
How do you get out of a contract? Well, people leave all the time. It's like, even when I joined, they're leaving all the time. It's like
is that more of a modern thing? The contract that I'm thinking about. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what they signed to this day. When I signed, it was just a billion-year contract, was much more of a pledge, Yeah. And then you weren't legally obligated. It wasn't like a legal contract. In my case, they broke my contract by not supplying me with dental work. I needed an emergency root canal. And I said, you have to supply this to me. This is, they broke the contract with me, not the other way around. So, you know, I said, you put up or shut up. And I basically left under their protocol. I followed their regulations to leave. And it was a great experience in synchronicity, because I had signed my Sea Org contract on April 28th, 1972. And I got my walking papers on April 28th, 1983. That was 11 years. What I did not know at that time is that April 28th, 1952 was the day that the peace treaty was Emperor Hirohito's birthday, and was the day the peace treaty between Japan and the Allies, including the United States, took effect in 1952, 1945 aboard the USS Missouri. So it was connecting me to my future work, which of course is very much involved with Emperor Hirohito and his role in World War II. But that's a whole nother story, and we're kind of getting long on time.
Well, yeah, no, I don't want to drag it out too much more. I wanted to touch on one more thing, getting away from Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard. You were touching about Romania a little bit, and I looked into some of your books about the Romanian Sphinx, and I was wondering if you could tell me anything about that.
Okay, in the early 2000s, Dr. David Anderson had been going to Romania, and I had a publisher in Romania had a copy of the Montauk Project book in English, and he asked his editor to read it and tell him if it was good to publish. The editor read it, said, "Yeah, you should publish this. It's good." The publisher said, "I don't want to do it." So that editor, Sorin Hormuz, went out on his own, and he created his own publishing company based upon the Montauk Project in Romania. He is now a very successful publisher in Romania. Well, after he published the Montauk Project, it was read by a member of Romania's secret department, Department Zero, who read the book and says, "I have a book I would like to share with you. Would you like to read it? Publish it." So he sent it to him, and it is a book that years later I published in English called Transylvania Sunrise. And it's about a discovery that was made underneath the Romanian Sphinx, which is a stone structure in the Bucegi Mountains of Romania. Yes, I have been to this stone Sphinx many times. And underneath, about 300 meters, they discovered a chamber that included holographic technology and a device that could show the history of the world in holographic form. And within that projection hall, is what they called it, were 3 tunnels that went to similar installations.
Tibet, Egypt,
one Tibet, one in Egypt, one in Baghdad, and another tunnel went into the inner earth itself. Now, this is a whole nother subject. Transylvania Sunrise is the name of the book. And this again, all of this stuff in Transylvania. And I have to say, when I would go to Montauk and investigate the Montauk Project, I would be treated as if I was a crucifix and they were a vampire. That is the way the people would treat me in trying to investigate this project back in the day.
Was it because you were probably asking key questions, Peter? I mean, when it comes down to it, you seem to have more knowledge on these subjects than a lot of people.
Well, there's no question of that. And then when I go to Transylvania, however, I have been welcomed. I have been treated with great appreciation. And I am a legend in Transylvania, literally. I even have a wife from Transylvania to prove it. And she's a very young lady, very young, beautiful young lady. And so Transylvania has been very positive for me. And but this is another story for another time.
But I also want to share the other site that you gave with me, where everybody can check out your books, because I know we're getting a little stretched on time. We'll try to wrap it up here in the next 6 minutes. I just appreciate your time, Peter, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to check out where your book's at. And that's at skybooks.usa.com. I got the ticker running on the bottom for everybody, where you can find all of Peter's work. And Peter, if you'd like to do a last plug for your current book that you just came out with recently, because Peter's got a lot of work. I'm interested in Montauk and a lot of stuff, but he's got tons and tons of work. He's a great author, and I want people to check out all of your work.
The most recent book, it's a very important book. It's called The Roswell Deception, The Roswell Deception and the Demystification of World War II, which you will find out what really happened at Roswell and how the Army was playing the public to believe it was aliens at Roswell, because they were really hiding what had happened from the Japanese. And that the Japanese did not lose the war, as we have been told. And it is 1952, the Peace Treaty of San Francisco. You will see that the treaty was signed in 1951, went to effect in 1952, and actually was not the battleship Missouri, and that the Japan had the United States by the balls because they had weapons, biological weapons of mass destruction. And these were landed in super dirigibles at Area 51 as a threat. They didn't release them. And they were operated, the dirigibles were operated by tiny Yakuza. These are the criminal class of Japan who were loyal to the emperor. They're about 4 feet tall. And they were actually turned into aliens by the U.S. Air Force, because the Air Force had them as prisoners of war. It's a whole scandal. I'm not going to go into it now, but
that's fine.
This book is ground shaking, and nobody wants to believe it's true, because they'll learn that their whole history of the United States and what they thought is true is false. And this was given to us by Douglas Dietrich, a Defense Department research librarian whose job it was to burn these documents that told the truth of the history of the United States war machine.
Interesting. Does it just out of curiosity, the little bit that you explained, does it touch at all about the Civil War battles that are often misinterpreted, or does it just talk about more later stuff than that?
It doesn't talk about the Civil War medals. I can tell you that the Congressional Medal of Honor is an upside down pentagram invented by drafted by a guy named Wilson. And an upside down pentagram is a satanic symbol. But I don't know anything. It doesn't mention about the Civil War medals. No.
No. I was wondering if it talked about the Civil War battles specifically, not medals. How some of them were depicted publicly as some we won and some we didn't. I didn't know if it was similar to that.
Civil War. It's about World War II with some of World War I in there, and how biological weapons were used to win World War I. But it's not about the Civil War, no.
Okay. I didn't know if it touched, how far back it touched. But Peter, thank you again so much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I would love to have you on again, Peter. I appreciate it so much. I feel like I could pick your brain for hours, but I appreciate the little bit of time we got. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. If you have a second, hang out for a second, Peter. I wanted to ask you one question before, but I'm going to sign off on the online. And everybody have a good night. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Okay.